This is Mark. In this video, I want to talk about narcissism and really how it originates. So we can kind of construct, this is what we construct a spectrum. So with any like disorder in general, there's a limits. So let's consider this like a limit, L. And this is the, so anywhere, if you reside anywhere along here on the spectrum, this is narcissist. And the limit can change. So really, really a lot of these disorders are based on a relative scale. So what the spectrum represents is like this. So on this end, it's basically a narcissist by like a definition. There's many definitions, but it's really just a projection. It's like a projection. So think of like think of an image. So how would I put this? So typically we receive feedback. Let's say if we consider reward / validation. So typically, let's just say this is a cyclic. It's usually cyclic. Like we receive reward in different periods. So let's just say it kind of follows like this. Maybe it changes. Maybe it goes like this throughout a day or so forth. It's always oscillating, and this is like the peak. So suppose that this represents the reward and that we receive, and now this is a natural reward, or the validation if we do not alter our identity in some way. And we truly don't even know our identity. We're always trying to construct it based on the external circumstances. So that's why this is like a spectrum. We all exist along here. We're all trying to create some sort of type of an image, a projection from what you could consider the self, because we don't truly know the self. It's a conglomerate. We take an aggregate of all these ideas that are coming outside in the world that aren't even our own ideas, and we're putting it together in some way, or we want to get to a certain destination and we make a projection and kind of change and alter the way we behave or act, and maybe we want to receive that more validation or reward. So essentially what ends up happening is a narcissist will try to maximize the validation or the reward or whatever feedback or positive feedback in some way. So what a narcissist strives to do is they basically take this and how would I put this? So if this is a typical reward feedback, so narcissists will kind of try to amplify. So narcissist wants to amplify this. And naturally, they want to minimize this weakness. So again, at the troughs, a narcissist still wants to not go in a negative direction. So in order to, what they do is they try to construct, and there's subsets of narcissism. So for all cases, typically narcissists are going to want to receive feedback in some way, but they could in some form act like a self, or live in the world of self-pity because or constantly complaining because they want some extreme validation. So it can kind of go in the other direction. And that's more of a volatility. But I think of typical narcissism would not want to show a weakness, So usually the the dips are going to be dampened, and the peaks are going to be amplified in some way. So like this is a typical scenario. So then if we construct, so the narcissist will strive, well, basically the trajectory is going to, may start up here. Well, essentially, if we start right here, it's going to try, they're going to try to, typically it's going to be more static, but this is this is like a reaction. We're going to consider this a reaction, and this is the positive direction, and this is the let's say negative. So basically, we can draw a function of reaction and reward. So basically, when reward is 0, so there's some positive relationship. We don't know exactly the relationship, but it's a positive, meaning there's going to be a more positive reaction. So this is in the positive direction when the reward increases in this direction. Of course, if the reward were depreciated, the reaction gets depreciated, and this is like I guess if we considered a negative, this is like for positive case, so this is like positive feedback. So essentially, a narcissist, how would I put this? So typically there's not this, think of this like a one-to-one or relation. If we think of this as like a one-to-one relation, well, that would be like linear. That's a typical case. So there should be like I think of like a one-to-one relationship between reaction and reward, feedback. So typically you get very happy. You get very happy when you have a positive feedback and you react in some way, amplifies your reaction. You get confident and so forth. So typically what a narcissist will do is they will diverge from this one-to-one relationship. So what that entails is that, if we consider like, say, like if it was one-to-one, basically, let's just say this is a reward, and let's just say the feedback matches the reward. So basically this is like, so the solid is reward, and the dashed line is reaction. And a narcissist, so this is normal. Let's say that's normal, even though we can't really define normal. But let's suppose now we have the same reward. Narcissist makes a projection. It's like a delusion. So this signifies on the spectrum. So when we talk about the spectrum, suppose in like the center, like let's just say in the center we have, this is like we call like and then we have that limit. So this is like limits. And then this would be depreciated, usually like in depression. If we're considering the spectrum, it may be depreciated. Like so there could be like a so we're considering this normal reward. It may be lower, and then let's say this is like the one-to-one case, or it's a equivalence, and then over here it's It's greatly amplified. So, um, so this is over here is narcissism. And this is just based on our definition. Basically, what uh, there is like that limit where like you see a psychiatrist and he defines in his terms based on, okay, you pass this limit, your reaction is it's delusional based on what is really occurring, and that's based on the image that you want to create to minimize the weaknesses and try to reinforce like strength or strengths. It's based on your perception of what you want to create, the persona you want to, the take on, the act or so forth. Because, and then you want to reinforce on other people's maybe energy and get narcissistic supply and derive reward to kind of amplify and keep doing this positive feedback loop. So you keep amplifying, like getting a positive or dilute, like almost a diluted reaction in a sense. So of course, on the spectrum, someone could have like a minute or dampen, and that's kind of like depression. So like depression over here is where the response is dulled relative to or the reaction is dulled relative to the typical reward. If reward was treated as equal for like a case where you should, like if you're in a normal state, you should receive this typical reaction. And that doesn't necessarily have to be exactly we can't really quantify it, but I just did it in this, this way to kind of like or to quantify in this way to show like, yes, you can have a reaction that matches the reward and like maybe in a similar manner. But yeah, I just tend to think of this like narcissism to be a projection or an image of an image you want to create, and also it's also proportional to the thirst for validation. So there's also like a thirst for validation. Or narcissism, we get narcissist proportional. This means proportional to thirst for the validation. So if the thirst for, so like how would I put this? So if we consider like on the XY, this is like reward. And this is thirst. Or if we quantify like our validation, so thirst for or need. So the need for validation. So if the reward, let's just say this is a so if we represent like this as a okay, so basically let's say, okay, so this is a reward right here. So if we project all the way to this point, this is a spectrum. So like someone could get here, someone may here, someone may hit here. Again, if the reward is up here, likely, so let's say you get some feedback. Like you have a typical reward. Let's say like everyone plays a game, and there's a typical, you get some feedback, but you dilute it, or basically take that feedback, and it can easily be, you can exist anywhere here. It could easily be depreciated. So like if the thirst remains high, so this is actually after the reward. This is like what this function represents is once the reward is over, or you receive like basically feedback, it's how your mind takes that feedback. So if the thirst remains really high, like in this case, or way up here, this also shows that narcissism, or kind of like correlates to narcissistic behavior, because the thirst is is really high relative to what is typical. This has to do with contentment. So thirst for validation, someone could be very content and with the reward that was received, and therefore the thirst is minimized. So if someone has a very strong thirst relative to what is let's say you could think of normal, even though that's a relative scale, then it points to narcissism to a degree. But we all exhibit the thirst. We all exhibit the need. It's just how far it is along the spectrum of this. And of course, with I think any disorder, they're not really perfectly constructed. This is just behavioral properties that we observe over, and with any disorders like a spectrum, it's a scale, and basically once you pass this limit, that's how we define these disorders. They're really morphed to normalize things. It's really based on the neutral axis, and if you deviate from that, then it becomes a disorder, and that's kind of why disorders keep increasing, and they keep increasing. And of course, there's corruption in the medical field, and there's not a lot of consistency in some of these disorders, and that can cause a lot of problems because there's the insurance companies are being fed, even though these disorders have a weak basis. Some of them, of course, a lot of them have a stronger basis. I mean, there's bipolar disorder, which is a departure from the equilibrium of the neurotransmitter system. It's clearly evident that it manifests as a problem, and there needs to be medication for that. I mean, narcissism is more of it's just a projection based on our egoistic desires and the needs and what we want to maximize the feedback, and our reaction kind of alters in such a way to take it on and to maximize it's more centered towards selfishness and so forth. But I think we all exhibit that. We all, whether we want to believe, even I guess if you even help others based on personality characteristics, if you help people, but you have a high expectation that they should do something for you or help back, and then basically you if someone complains or gets extremely, or the reaction is so deviant from a typical response due to the thirst need for validation, then what it implies is that or that's what's creating, or this is what it's creating a volatility. It's something like what it implies actually is something wasn't provided at an early age. The validation, the expectation was not provided, and therefore it's kind of reinforcing this behavior. And that's why we get to the point, and we, even with BPD and other disorders, we put on like along even the narcissistic spectrum, even though these disorders are kind of generated by what has happened previously, there's some reinforcing agent. There's always some reinforcing agent that kind of creates or and of course there's genetics, but genetics are always evolving and changing based on experience and so forth. So something is kind of reinforcing this all the time. So, and that a lot of times it could be inevitable, but there are ways to change it if once awareness sets in. Just like Sam Vatkin or some self-aware narcissist, they understand that their behavior was kind of deviant from what is typical, and they kind of were aware that, called themselves or self-proclaimed themselves as narcissists, but at the same time, it's hard to define it act so precise. It's always going to have problems, and whether or not we are defined as narcissists or not is really predicated on just a reference point. But yeah, that's just my take on things. If you have another, I'm of course not really knowledgeable in this field. Just as is how I view it. I like kind of creating new ways of approaching or new ways of explaining things. It may not, of course, not I can refine and get better and better and better. Hopefully this was good, a good, decent representation. But yeah, if you have any comments or questions or anything that, if you disagree or so forth, well, I'm welcome. I mean, that's appreciate it. Always good to have constructive criticism. But yeah, that's all I have. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next